He's not talking to the religious leaders. He's talking to the political leaders. He's talking to the kings, to the advisors, to the people who are in charge. We read in Ezekiel 34, 5 and 7, about the people. He says they were scattered because there was no shepherd. In other words, the kings did not rule for the sake of the people. He said they were scattered because there was no shepherd. They became food for all the beasts of the field when they were scattered. My sheep wandered through all the mountains and on every high hill. Yes, my flock was scattered over the whole face of the earth, and no one was seeking or searching for them. And then we read in verse 17, as for you, O my flock, says the Lord God, behold, I will judge between sheep and sheep, between rams and goats. So there's that idea that's being present here in Matthew 25. Here it is on a national and an individual level. Now, this is further defined and it gives us more, there's more information given to us about this in Daniel 8. Why Daniel 8? Because Daniel has a vision of a ram and a goat who are fighting for supremacy. A ram and a goat who are fighting for supremacy. Now we know who the ram and the goat represent. We know that. We know that the ram represents Persia, and we know that the goat represented Greece, Macedonia. Okay? The goat was Greece, the ram was Persia, even though in Daniel 7, Persia is seen and represented as a monstrous, demonic-like bear monster. Okay? It's not Russia, it's Persia. I'm not going to get into that. I've been going into that in my Monday night class on Daniel. Some of you are in that, and I went into that really in depth last Monday night on an academic level. Okay? I explained why it's Persian and how the rabbis identify that as Persia as well. Okay? But what does it tell us? Here in Daniel 7, Persia is represented as one of the four empires, and it's represented as a bear with three ribs in its mouth, and it's tearing apart things and doing all kinds of things. But then in chapter 8, Persia is represented as a ram, a kosher animal. And what does this tell us? Well, it tells us that you can have a sheep nation that may also have a predatory nature or a predatory side to it, as Persia did, and yet still make right edicts and right decisions in relation to Israel, like Persia did through King Cyrus. Everybody following me? Okay? King Cyrus let the people go free, let the rebuilding of the temple commence, and yet was still a world empire, conquering and doing these types of things that empires do, that make certain mistakes. And we see that happen with Haman. Thank you. It took you a while. Maybe it's too early. All right. Now, when we look at Matthew 25:31, we see that this passage is in the context of Daniel 7. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, all the angels with him, then he will sit on his glorious throne. That's Daniel 7, where the Ancient of Days, the thrones are set up, and these empires, these monstrous beasts, and this little horn on this fourth beast are judged. Okay? So this has various ways of being applied, but the actual interpretation must refer to Israel and the nations. On Saturday, May 13th, 1939, the German passenger ship, the St. Louis, I told this story the other day, the St. Louis left Hamburg, Germany. Now, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, when really Jewish persecution really began to break out in Germany, that was November 9th, 1938. That was a little less than a year before. Okay? That was when you had National Socialists, the Nazi Party, and They were destroying Jewish businesses, Jewish cafes. They were spray painting, all that kind of stuff. They were having parades against the Jewish people. We're seeing that now. They were doing that. Well, on May 13th, 1939, the German passenger ship, the St. Louis, left Hamburg, Germany with 937 Jewish passengers seeking to escape Nazi Germany, okay? Now, here's where that ship went. The ship first went to Cuba. The ship first went to Cuba and was rejected and not allowed to dock in Cuba, and only 30 Jewish people were allowed to get off because they met the so-called requirements needed for a visa. The second place the ship went to was Canada. And actually, Canada issued an apology to Israel like in 2019 or 2018 or something like that. Canada did not allow the ship to dock and turned it away. Okay? The third place that the ship came to was the United States. And that ship went to Miami. And when the ship got to Miami, the United States denied the ship to dock, and there was no choice but for that ship to go back to Europe because the people were not allowed entry into the U.S. People escaping the Holocaust, people escaping death and torture and cremation in the oven. Now, I know when the final solution began and all that. I've done a lot of Holocaust work and worked with Holocaust survivors, so I understand all the dates and stuff like that. But they escaped just to save their lives. All right? Now, what happened was when the ship got back, it actually landed in France, and some of the people went to Belgium, the Netherlands, and France. And what happened was shortly thereafter, what happened? Well, the Nazis overran Europe. There was fighting in France. Poland was overtaken. You had the Germans bombing even England, Great Britain. And a quarter of the people on board that ship died in the Holocaust. They could have been saved had one of the nations just opened the doors to them. And they weren't. Okay? Some of the Jewish people who escaped Germany to come to the United States during the war were denied entry because they were accused of being Nazi spies. Some of the Jewish people, they were accused of being Nazi spies. In 1948, what year was Israel established as a nation? May 14th, 1948, my mother's birthday. It's a blessed day. 1948, America denied 90% of Holocaust survivors from entering the U.S. from Russia and Poland. 90%. 90%. Something that the Lord has shown me about this is that when the nations reject Israel and the Jewish people, they open the door to another nation to come in. And when you see that the nations are allowing anti-Semitism to emerge, looking down on cracking down on legislations against the Jews, then judgment is measure for measure, just like Yeshua said, midah le midah. Why is that? Well, because in rejecting the chosen people, then what happens is another nation comes in to judge that nation. And that nation seeks to take over through violence and through terror. If I just say the word terrorism, you understand who I'm talking about. All right? And that's what we've seen in West Europe. We've seen radicalization, Islamic radicalization taking place. We've seen that here. Now, one of the other horrific things, I'm not going to get into all of this, that would have to be a Holocaust series that I do or something like that. The New York Times buried many stories of the Holocaust and Germany's treatment of the Jews during the war. And what happened was the Jewish publisher Arthur Hayes Sulzberger, he put those stories of how the Nazis were treating Jews back by the soap and the shoe polish ads in the back. And so he didn't put them as headlines. And there was a book written in 2005 by Laurel Leff called "Buried in the Times" or something like that. Buried by the Times. That's what it is. Buried by the Times. And so this journalist documents how the New York Times was published by a Reform Jewish man, but he buried those stories in the back. And there was speculation that the reason why he did it was because he did not want to be perceived as giving favoritism towards his own people. And we see this nowadays. Well, they only look after their own, and you get what I'm saying? So there's speculation as to why he did that it may have been like a business move or something like that. And so what we see is at the time, it was the media here in the U.S. that also did not advocate for the Jews any more than the media is doing now. The media. Now, there was another newspaper about a decade before that was so influential that Hitler wound up having the editorials and the articles in that newspaper reprinted during Nazi Germany during World War II to incite more anti-Semitism. And the newspaper ran from 1919 to 1927. It was called the Dearborn Independent, and it was owned by a famous anti-Semite, Henry Ford. Anybody own a Ford? Okay. There's no condemnation on you. Don't go and burn your car. These anti-Semitic tires. They are terrible cars. I better shut up about that. It's a good car if you got to get from point A to point B. There, I balanced it out. So I'm not endorsing companies. No. So it was owned by Henry Ford, who was a virulent anti-Semite. The stuff that he allowed written against Jews was just horrible. The Dearborn Independent. Now, anybody ever heard of a place named Dearborn, Michigan? Yeah. Anybody know the majority, the demographic in Dearborn, Michigan? Okay. That's where the Dearborn Independent was published. That's where it was printed. So the place all that anti-Semitism came out of now has a group of people, has a radicalization that has anchored itself there. Do you understand what I'm saying? Okay. Now, when Yeshua says, he says here that all the nations will be gathered before him. The context is the nations. And he says, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. Now, like I said, there is an individual component to this, yes, but there's also national component to this. Now, who was the kingdom originally prepared for? The kingdom prepared from the foundation of the world was originally prepared for Israel, the covenant nation, and those who would be engrafted to Israel through Israel's Messiah. Okay? But the kingdom was prepared for Israel. The disciples, they come to Yeshua and they say, hey, are you going to restore the kingdom at this time? In the book of Acts, he says, it's not for you to know the times and the seasons. All right? So the kingdom was prepared for Israel. Israel will become saved because the nations will turn against her. Now, currently, there are 15.7 million Jews in the world as of September 15th, 2023. That's from the Jewish agency, their stats. There are 15.7 million Jews in the world. There was a man in the Ukraine, and he said to the Lord, Lord, I really want to have a heart for your people, the Jewish people. I really want to have a heart for the covenant people. And the Lord told him, okay, wear a kippah all week, 24/7. Wait till that's over. So, can you all hear me if I'm still talking? You can? I can get louder. That's not a problem. Um, Whatever the emergency is, Lord, we just pray that you go with your peace to that emergency, that you would be with those firefighters and EMT workers. And Lord, bring salvation, bring deliverance. Let it not be such an extreme thing, but Lord, bring healing and bring deliverance through the hands of those brave individuals who are going forth to that emergency in Yeshua's name. Amen. And so the Lord told him, wear a kippah all week, day and night. So he did, and he got beat up 3 times. He got beat up 3 times. The first time he got beat up, he was like, maybe I should take this thing off. And the Lord said, well, you wanted to have a heart for my people. And so he continued, and so now my buddy who knows him, he says he actually gets beat up, once in a while. And he doesn't wear the kippah all the time, but he does it in solidarity with Israel. Now, here's where this is coming down to. People love the Jewish roots. They love everything about Israel. It's going to become harder to support Israel and to stand with Israel and the Jewish people. So you need to be sober about where you stand with Israel, and that you're not just doing it because it's some kind of fad in the church, or because it's like some kind of spiritual toy. Because if you're not anchored in the Lord, you'll easily turn, just like a lot of people did during Nazi Germany. And the church did not do her job in Nazi Germany, and she could have, and there would not have been the results that had happened. And so that's why I say it is not political, it's spiritual. I got that from a pastor that I listened to. It's not political, it's spiritual, because if the church had gotten involved, well, God is sovereign. Yes, God is sovereign, but he doesn't tell you what to eat for breakfast. You choose that. And he can work things out for good, like he has. But there's a reason you only have a few Christians like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Corrie ten Boom, and those are the only 2 that I can even think of off the top of my head. Because there were so many others that took up the Nazi ideologies and didn't even stand with the Jewish people. And there were Muslims in like Turkey who did take in Jewish people. There were Catholics who hid Jewish people. There were Jewish people who left their children with Catholic families and said, please adopt them. And so, as the days get colder and darker, it will become harder to stand with the Jewish people. And this is what I call really the Ruth calling for those who are coming. And for those, when I speak in churches and things like that, and people support Israel and they love, this is what I call the Ruth calling. What did Ruth tell Naomi? She said, I'll go wherever you go. I'll be buried and I'll die where you die. In other words, there was such a solid linking that you're saying, if something bad happens to you, then I'm going to be in it with you. I'm going to link my arms with you. Okay? Currently, there are 15.7 million Jews in the world. There are between 7.2 and 7.4 million Jews in Israel. And do you think they're the majority population in their own land? No, that's 47% of the population. 47%. There are 6.3 million Jews in the United States, and there are about 200 to 330 million other Semitic peoples around them. What do I mean by Semitic? Okay, the word Semite comes from the word Shem. It did not originate until the 1800s. And so it's more of a scientific racial term to refer to the ethnic group that the Jewish people belong to, the sons of the third son of Noah, Shem, so Semite. Okay, now Persians, they're not Semites. Arabs are Semites. You have the Lebanese who are more of Canaanite origin, but you have various people who speak Aramaic. Aramaic is a Semitic language like Hebrew is. That's why sometimes there are words that are the same. You ever hear me teaching on Aramaic or different stuff like that. Arabic is, and Semitic language. And so there are some words that are very similar, even though Arabic is a lot harder than Hebrew, and it's a younger language than Hebrew. So you have about 330 million Semites, just people who descend from Shem. The Assyrians who went in and took the northern tribe captive, they were Semites. They were Semites. They were of the family of Shem. The Babylonians, they were Semites. Okay? So it's like this, it's these nations that bridged off. 23% of the world's Muslim population. How many Muslims are there? Anybody know? There's a little over 1 billion, actually. 23% of the world's Muslim population lives in what's called the MENA region, which is Middle East, North African region. That means Israel is surrounded by her enemies. You know that. I was just articulating that with numbers. Okay? So here's how Messiah identifies. Here is how Messiah identifies those in Matthew 25, 31 through 46, who are the least of them. Well, who are the least of them among his brothers? It's probably those who don't believe in him. It's those who don't know him yet. And here's the thing. Well, Christians have been persecuted. Christians have been persecuted, but never on the level that Jewish people have. And here's why. Because Christianity is not a nation. It's not an ethnic group. Christianity is an expression of the faith in Israel's Messiah. Jewish people are an ethnic group. Jewish people are an ethnic group. That's why you hear people say, well, you don't look Jewish, you know. And so you could look at Jews in Ethiopia or Sephardim like me and Orlando. I mean, he has the wonderful, wonderfully coiffed beard, like if there was a beard commercial, he would be turning like that, and there would be glistening oil off of it, and I don't have that. Mine is my wife likes me without it anyway. But hey, the good thing is that my nose is working for me when we met, because she said, I just thought, oh, I'm glad God gave me a husband with a large nose, because I don't like these little guys with little noses, Maybe that's a little too much information there. I don't know. TMI. Okay. Now here's here's where it comes down to, because through you all the families of the nations will be blessed, is what God told Abraham, and we know that promise ultimately is ratified, it's fulfilled through Israel's Messiah. We even find that the blessing of Abraham conferred to the Gentiles in Galatians, and the blessing of Abraham in the book of Acts is used in terms of the salvation that Yeshua brings towards eternal life. That's a separate teaching, but when we look at Revelation 12, this is where it really comes together. This is where it really comes together. If you go to Revelation 12, we read about a woman who symbolizes Israel. Okay? Verse 5, she gave birth to a son, a male child. Who is that? That's the Messiah. That's the Messiah. The Messiah has come through the people of Israel. And then we read that the dragon gets enraged because he tries to, he's kicked out of heaven. He's kicked with his angels out of heaven. All right? And then what happens is he begins to persecute the woman who gave birth to the male child. Verse 13. And so what happens is the serpent gets so angry, verse 15, that he pours water out of his mouth like a flood, is what it says. What was the name of the October 7th invasion? It was Al-Aqsa flood. So some prophetic people have made note of that. We don't want to say dogmatically that's what it is. But there is something that emerged from October 7th that did reach the nations. And we've seen a rise in anti-Semitism like never before. A 300% rise in anti-Semitism in the United States in 2023. 300%. Okay? So there's definitely been a spiritual component to this. As I said right at the beginning, Yahya Sinwar, the mastermind behind October 7th, who yielded himself up to the devil, was killed on the first day of Sukkot this year, as that event that he orchestrated took place on the last day of Sukkot last year. So there is something prophetic to all of that. All right? Now here's what happens. Here's how the body of Messiah and the Jewish people come into alignment in the last days. Here's how they come into alignment. We read in verse 16, the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth, drank up the river which the dragon poured out of its mouth. Or the flood, the dragon poured out its mouth. So the dragon was enraged with the woman. So as we see this virulent anti-Semitism see and get more enraged that Israel is actually getting the victory, because God is delivering Israel's enemies into their hands right now. Thank God. And many Israelis are getting the gospel like never before. And the good thing is it's not the woke gospel like here in America. It's the real gospel. It's focusing on Messiah. The dragon was enraged with the woman, so that means the devil is going to get so mad at Israel because he can't destroy Israel. This is what's going to happen. He's going to go off to make war with the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Yeshua. Who's that? That's the believers. And that's why you have these voices that are very vehement, they're very inflammatory, and they're saying, well, we wouldn't have the kind of support for Israel if it wasn't for the Christians. If it wasn't for the evangelicals who support Israel so much. And so there's going to be a turning where God is going to bring the body in Israel into alignment through persecution. And that's how that unity will occur. That's how I believe it will happen. It's right there. Now, where does God gather the nations to separate them between being sheep and goats? Where does he do that? Well, we read about that in Joel chapter 3. That I will gather all the nations down into the valley of Jehoshaphat. What does Jehoshaphat mean? It means God judges. The Lord judges. He says, I will gather them down in the valley of Jehoshaphat. And he says, for this reason, because they scattered my people and they divided my land. And all the international pressure that has occurred from the nations to be put upon Israel and the Jewish people that have caused many Jews to leave, God says, I'm gonna make a distinction here. Now, for those who redeemed from these nations, you're engrafted in. You're saved. You're delivered. You're here. You're saying, we're praying for the salvation of Israel. We're praying for hope and life to the Jewish people. We're praying for Messiah's power and authority to be realized in the nations through his deliverance and for revival to break forth. Because you recognize that valley is the courtroom, and the courtroom is actually a war zone. And that's how God is going to make a distinction between the sheep and the goat nations. What will happen when greater pressure is put on Israel, or when there's more terrorism on Israel? Will we be open as a nation? Will we be open as a nation, or will we close our doors as we did in World War II? Well, that's why we need to have the border open. No, that's ridiculous. You don't lift up the standard in order to fulfill an ideal. There's the most human sex trafficking that has come through the open border, but there need to be things in place that will allow for Jewish people to come in should there ever be something like this again. And so there are people that are called to pray. There are people who are called to bring political reform in the government. That like Isaiah. Isaiah was in the palace. He was giving the king advice. So you can't write that off completely and just say, well, God is sovereign. Well, we'll say that whenever you get stung by a bee. Well, yes, he is sovereign. But it's not his fault that you got stung. It's not his fault you ran out of gas when you didn't put gas in your car. Well, the devil's harassing me today. Why? What happened? Well, I ran out of gas. Oh, why'd you run out of gas? Well, I didn't put gas all week. Well, that's your fault, not the devil's. So there are things that we can do that are practical. And there are things that we, no matter what, you could trust in God. No matter what, you trust in God. And as a ministry, we want to be prepared to be able to minister to Jewish people during duress. And during these times, it's being the loving arms and the loving voice of compassion. It's lending an ear to hear, what are you going through? What are you dealing with? And through that, allowing God to show you, this is how you minister to them. Nachamu, nachamu ami. How is Israel comforted? Ultimately through their Messiah. But we are to comfort with more than just words. All right? So let's all stand. Let me say this as well, because you don't want to get puffed up. You don't want to be like someone waving their finger at other people that don't have this understanding and saying, aha, we need to tread with humility before the Lord, because it's by His mercy that you're here and that you have this understanding, that we all have this understanding. Amen? All right. So, do we have any instructions? Do we need to wait for the food?
As the men are bringing out the tables, if any ladies want to come and help us get things out of the fridge, I think it'll work out well.
Okay, ladies to help. Yes, sir. Okay. All right, gentlemen, let's go in through the side door down here, past the gate, and bring the tables up from this door here in the back. All right? And then ladies, if you can help with the food, all right? Maybe we could just stretch across the aisles and you could hold hands with your neighbor. Come together as one. Let's all come together. There are no loners in the kingdom. Hi. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha v'yichonecha. Hisa Adonai panav elecha v'yosem lecha shalom. The Lord bless you and guard you. The Lord make His face shine towards you, be gracious to you. The Lord lift up His countenance towards you and give you peace through the Prince of Peace, Son of God, the hope for Israel and the nations, Yeshua our Messiah. And Shabbat Shalom. All right, prayer 2:30 p.m.